My children forgot to invite me for Easter. So I forgot to tell them about selling the family home. And let me tell you, the looks on their faces when they found out was worth every second of heartbreak they put me through. If you enjoy stories about entitled children getting exactly what they deserve, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of sweet, sweet revenge. I'm Margaret, a 68-year-old widow who spent my entire life putting my 3 children first. After my husband Robert passed away 5 years ago, I continued maintaining our large family home where we'd raised our children, hoping it would remain the gathering place for holidays and family celebrations. The 5-bedroom colonial had been in our family for over 30 years, filled with memories and the echoes of laughter from happier times. I'd always been the heart of our family, cooking elaborate holiday meals and making sure everyone felt special on their birthdays. Even as my children grew up and started their own families, I maintained all our traditions, spending weeks preparing for each holiday to make it perfect for everyone. Easter had always been particularly special, with egg hunts for the grandchildren, my famous honey-glazed ham, and homemade hot cross buns that took me 2 days to prepare. This year, as Easter approached, I waited for the usual calls from my children discussing plans. But oddly, my phone remained silent. I thought perhaps they were busy, so I called my oldest son Michael first. "Oh, Mom, we're actually going to Diane's parents this year," he said, referring to his wife. His voice had that dismissive tone I'd grown sadly familiar with. "Her mom is doing a big thing. I thought someone would have told you by now." Confused, I called my daughter Jennifer next. "Mom, we decided to do something different this year," she said with an impatient sigh. "The kids wanted to go to a resort with an Easter brunch and activities. You know how boring they find coming to your place." Boring? The house where I spent hours hiding eggs and preparing special baskets for each grandchild? Finally, I called my youngest son, Peter. "Sorry, Mom. Rachel and I are taking the kids to her sister's place," he mumbled. "It's just easier that way. I figured you'd understand." None of them had bothered to tell me. None of them had thought to include me in their plans. None of them had even considered how I might spend the holiday alone. What my children didn't know, or perhaps simply didn't care about, was everything I had sacrificed for them throughout their lives. Michael, my oldest at 45, had always been ambitious, but financially reckless. When he decided at 32 that he wanted to leave his stable accounting job to start his own firm, I was the one who remortgaged my home to give him $75,000 in startup capital. He had promised to pay me back within 5 years, but 13 years later, not a single dollar had been returned. His wife Diane had always looked down on me. She came from money and made little effort to hide her disdain for my middle-class ways. When they built their new house in the expensive part of town 3 years ago, they didn't even invite me to the housewarming. I only saw it 2 months later when I dropped off Christmas gifts. Jennifer, my only daughter, now 42, had been the most expensive child by far. I paid $120,000 for her college education at a private university, followed by $35,000 for her elaborate wedding to Eric, an investment banker who made more than enough to cover the costs himself. When they had twins 5 years ago, I spent my entire retirement savings of $40,000 to help them add an extension to their home. Jennifer had promised they would take care of me in my old age in return, a promise that now rang hollow as she couldn't even be bothered to include me in Easter plans. Then there was Peter, my youngest at 38. Sweet-natured, but perpetually struggling, Peter had moved back home 4 separate times after financial setbacks. The last time, after his divorce from his first wife, he lived with me rent-free for 3 years while I watched his 2 children every day so he could work. I even paid $28,000 for his wedding to Rachel, his second wife, who made no secret of finding me old-fashioned and a bit much. All 3 of my children had grown increasingly distant over the past few years. Holiday gatherings had become shorter, phone calls rarer. They would drop by only when they needed something, childcare, money, or help with household projects. I had noticed the pattern but had been making excuses for them. They were busy with their own lives, raising their own families, building their careers. What they didn't know was that 6 months ago, I had received a diagnosis of early-stage breast cancer. I hadn't told them because I didn't want to worry them, and honestly, I wanted to see if they would notice something was wrong without me having to say it. They never did. I underwent surgery and radiation alone, taking taxis to and from the hospital because I didn't want to burden them. I was now in remission, thankfully, but the experience had opened my eyes to just how one-sided our relationship had become. And there was something else they didn't know. 3 months ago, I had received an offer from a developer to purchase our family home. The property values in our neighborhood had skyrocketed as the area gentrified, and they were offering $950,000, nearly triple what Robert and I had paid for it all those years ago. I had been hesitant, sentimental about the memories, but after being excluded from Easter, something inside me shifted. The Easter weekend that I spent alone was the final straw in what had been years of growing neglect. I made myself a small ham sandwich and ate it while looking through old photo albums, tears streaming down my face as I remembered all the holidays when this house had been filled with laughter and love. On Easter Monday, my phone suddenly came alive with messages from all 3 children. "Hope you had a nice Easter, Mom," texted Jennifer as if it was an afterthought. "Sorry again about Easter. We'll make it up to you next year," Michael wrote. Peter didn't even mention Easter, just asked if I could watch his kids on Wednesday because their regular sitter was sick. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I called the developer and accepted their offer on the house. Then I called my friend Elaine, a real estate attorney who had helped me through Robert's estate matters. "Are you sure about this, Margaret?" she asked when I told her my plan. "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied. "It's time I started living for myself." Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Elaine to expedite the sale. The developer was eager to begin their project and offered to close in 30 days. They also agreed to let me rent back the house for 2 months while I found a new place to live. Everything was proceeding smoothly, and still I told none of my children. During this time, they continued their usual pattern. Jennifer called to ask if I could help pay for her twins' summer camp, a prestigious program costing $4,000 per child. Michael needed another small loan of $10,000 to cover business expenses until a big client paid him. Peter continued dropping his children off at my house without notice, sometimes leaving them for entire weekends. When Michael came by to pick up the check I'd written him, he barely stayed 10 minutes. "The place looks different, Mom. Are you redecorating?" he asked, glancing around the living room where I'd already begun packing some items into boxes. "Just spring cleaning," I said with a smile. Jennifer noticed nothing when she came by to collect her check, too busy complaining about how her husband was never home and how exhausting the twins were. Peter, at least, seemed concerned when he saw a stack of boxes in the hallway. "Are you going somewhere, Mom?" he asked. "Just organizing some things," I replied. It's good to sort through stuff every now and then. The closing date for the house sale arrived, and I signed the papers in Elaine's office. The developer's check for $950,000 was deposited into my new account at a bank none of my children used. That same day, I put a deposit down on a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in a senior living community 20 miles away, close enough to still see my grandchildren if their parents bothered to bring them, but far enough that I wouldn't be an easy option for free childcare or loans. I gave my children no indication of these major changes. In fact, I continued as if nothing had changed, still agreeing to watch grandchildren and listening to their problems on the phone. But inside, I felt different. Lighter. As if I was finally taking control of my life after decades of putting everyone else first. The developer gave me 60 days to move out after closing, as we had agreed. I used this time to carefully sort through 30 years of possessions, deciding what to keep, what to give away, and what to sell. I hired professional movers and arranged for my new condo to be painted and carpeted before I moved in. All of this I did without telling my children. Exactly 7 weeks after closing and 3 months after the Easter snub, I was ready for the final phase of my plan. It was Jennifer who provided the perfect opportunity when she called to discuss Thanksgiving plans. "We should probably do it at your house again, Mom," she said, not even bothering to phrase it as a question. "Our place is being renovated, and Michael's isn't big enough." "Actually," I said calmly, "I won't be hosting Thanksgiving this year." "What? Why not?" Jennifer sounded genuinely shocked, as if the idea that I might have plans of my own had never occurred to her. "I think it's best if we have a family meeting. Can you and your brothers come over this Sunday at 2? "Mom, Sunday is really not good for me. The twins have soccer. This is important, Jennifer, I cut her off firmly. Sunday at 2. Please make sure Michael and Peter are here too. That Sunday, all three of my children arrived at the house, curiosity and annoyance competing on their faces. Michael came alone, explaining that Diane had a charity function. Jennifer brought her husband Eric, who immediately sat in the corner checking emails on his phone. Peter and Rachel came with their children, who ran upstairs to play in what had once been their father's childhood bedroom. I had prepared coffee and the homemade cinnamon rolls they all loved but rarely appreciated. As they settled in the living room, Jennifer was the first to notice that many of the family photos were missing from the walls. Mom, what's going on? Are you redecorating finally? This place could use an update. I took a deep breath and looked at each of them in turn. These adults who had once been my sweet, loving children. Where had I gone wrong? I've sold the house, I said simply. The silence that followed was deafening. You what? Michael was the first to recover, his face reddening instantly. That's not funny, Mom, Jennifer said with a nervous laugh. I'm not joking, I replied. I sold the house 3 months ago. The new owners take possession in 2 weeks. You can't do that. Peter exploded. This is our family home. You can't just sell it without telling us. Actually, I can. The house was solely in my name after your father died. And I did sell it. For $950,000. Their expressions shifted instantaneously from shock to calculation. I could practically see the dollar signs in their eyes as they processed the amount. Well, Michael said, his tone suddenly conciliatory, I guess if it's already done, it's done. Have you thought about where you'll live? You could move in with one of us. I highly doubted Diane would welcome me into their home, but I appreciated his sudden show of concern now that a significant sum of money was involved. I've bought a condo in Riverside Meadows, I said. That senior place? Jennifer's nose wrinkled in disgust. Mom, you're not that old. Why would you want to live with a bunch of old people? They have excellent amenities, including a swimming pool and fitness center. And I've already made several friends there. But what about the money? Peter asked bluntly. After you buy the condo, there should be quite a bit left over. And there it was. The real concern. Yes, I said. There is. They waited expectantly. I've set up college funds for each of my grandchildren. $25,000 each, to be held in trust until they're 18. That seemed to please them until they realized I was done speaking. And the rest? Michael pressed. The rest is mine, I said firmly. I've earned it. The explosion that followed was exactly what I had anticipated. All three of my children began speaking at once, their voices rising over each other. After everything we've done for you. We've always been there when you needed us. You're being incredibly selfish, Mom. I let them vent for exactly 1 minute before I stood up, walked to the coffee table, and picked up a thick folder I had prepared. I want each of you to look at something, I said, opening the folder and passing out individual packets I had prepared. These are itemized lists of all the financial support I've provided to each of you since you turned 21. They reluctantly took the papers, their eyes widening as they scanned the meticulously documented lists. Michael showed the $75,000 startup loan, plus another $63,000 in smaller loans over the years, none of which had ever been repaid. It also included the current market value of that money had it been invested instead, over $210,000. Jennifer showed her college tuition, wedding costs, home renovation contribution, and numerous smaller expenses totaling just over $230,000, with investment calculations bringing the total to nearly $300,000. Peter's included the 3 periods of free housing, calculated at fair market rent, childcare, calculated at professional nanny rates, his wedding costs, and various other expenses, totaling approximately $180,000. I've been more than generous with all of you, I said quietly. And I've never asked for anything in return except your time and consideration. But when none of you could even be bothered to include me in Easter plans, not even a phone call to see if I would be alone on a family holiday, I realized that our relationship has become entirely one-sided. Mom, that's not fair, Jennifer protested. We've been busy with our own families. Too busy to pick up the phone? I asked. Too busy to include your mother in a family holiday? It was just one Easter, Michael muttered. It wasn't just Easter, I countered. It was Christmas, when you all left by 2 p.m. It was my birthday, which two of you forgot entirely. It was the surgery I had 6 months ago that none of you knew about because none of you have asked how I'm doing in years. Surgery. Peter looked genuinely shocked. What surgery? I had a lumpectomy and radiation for early-stage breast cancer. I'm in remission now, thank you for asking. The stunned silence that followed gave me a grim satisfaction. Why didn't you tell us? Jennifer whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Why should I have to? I asked simply. Why don't you know what's happening in your mother's life? I let that sink in before continuing. I've made some decisions about my future. I'm moving to my new condo next week. I've set up the grandchildren's college funds. The remainder of the money is going into my retirement fund, which I'll use to travel and enjoy the life your father and I worked hard for but never got to experience together. I reached for another set of documents. I've also revised my will. The grandchildren will receive additional funds upon my death. The rest will go to cancer research and the women's shelter downtown. None of you will receive any further financial support from me. Their faces showed the slow dawning of realization that the bank of Mom was permanently closed. You can't be serious, Michael said, his voice wavering between anger and panic. I've never been more serious, I replied. And here's what's going to happen next. If you want to have a relationship with me going forward, there will be new rules. I will no longer be your ATM or your free babysitting service. I will be treated with respect and included in family events. If you can't abide by these terms, then I wish you well, but I won't be available. I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. I have some packing to finish. You're welcome to take any furniture or household items you want before I move. Just let me know in advance so I can be sure I'm not here when you come. As they sat there in stunned silence, I walked out of the room with my head held high for the first time in years. The 2 weeks that followed were transformative. Once the initial shock wore off, my children's reactions split along predictable lines. Michael was furious, sending a barrage of texts accusing me of being vindictive and cruel. When that didn't work, he switched to guilt, reminding me of all the times he'd helped me with computer problems or household repairs. I simply responded with screenshots of invoices showing I'd paid professionals to fix his rushed, incomplete work. Jennifer cycled between anger and tearful apologies. She showed up unannounced 3 times, once with flowers and twice with the twins, clearly hoping their presence would soften my resolve. I loved seeing my grandchildren, but I remained firm about my boundaries. When she casually mentioned they were thinking of putting the twins in private middle school and could really use some help with tuition, I simply smiled and said, "That sounds like a big decision. I'm sure you and Eric will figure it out." Peter, to my surprise, seemed to undergo a genuine transformation. He came alone one evening, bringing takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant. "I really messed up, Mom," he said as we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by half-packed boxes. "When you mentioned your surgery, I couldn't believe we didn't know. What kind of son doesn't know his mother had cancer?" His eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years, I saw my sweet boy instead of the entitled man he'd become. "I've been thinking about everything you've done for me and the kids," he continued, "and how little we've given back. I'm ashamed, Mom. Really ashamed." His apology felt sincere, and when he asked if he could help me move to my new place, I accepted. It was a small step, but it was something. My moving day arrived, and to my surprise, all 3 of my children showed up to help, though I suspected Jennifer and Michael came mainly to see what items of value might be left. Peter brought his pickup truck and did most of the heavy lifting. Jennifer organized the kitchen unpacking. Michael, ever practical, set up my television and internet. As we finished up that evening, standing in my new, smaller but much more manageable space, there was an awkward moment when they clearly didn't know how to say goodbye. "I'm hosting a small dinner next Sunday," I said finally. "Nothing fancy, just a home-cooked meal. You're all welcome to come if you'd like." They exchanged glances, seemingly unsure if this was a peace offering or another test. "I'd like that," Peter said first. "What can I bring?" "Just yourselves," I replied. "And maybe call first to confirm you're coming, so I know how much food to prepare." The dinner that Sunday was the first of what would become a new tradition. Not everyone came every time. Michael and Diane frequently had other commitments, but it was a start. Over the following months, our relationships began a slow, sometimes awkward healing process. I stuck to my boundaries firmly. When Jennifer called asking if I could watch the twins for a week while she and Eric went to the Bahamas, I politely declined, explaining I had a painting class I couldn't miss. When Michael hinted about needing a loan for a business opportunity, I wished him luck finding investors. My new community at Riverside Meadows became a source of unexpected joy. I joined the book club, took swimming classes, and even started dating a charming widower named Frank who lived 2 floors down. When I mentioned to Jennifer that Frank and I were going on a cruise to Alaska, something I'd always wanted to do but Robert had never been interested in, the shock on her face was priceless. "You're going on a cruise? With a man?" she asked, as if I was too old for such things. "Yes, Jennifer," I replied with a smile. It turns out life doesn't end at 68. 6 months after moving, I hosted Easter at my condo. It was a tight fit with everyone there, but we managed. As I looked around at my family, imperfect as they were, I felt no regret about the decisions I'd made. My children were slowly learning to see me as a person with my own life and needs, not just their mother who existed to serve theirs. The grandchildren adapted the fastest, delighting in the swimming pool at my complex and the ice cream shop within walking distance. Peter's youngest asked me one afternoon, "Grandma, are you happier in your new house?" "Yes, sweetheart," I told her honestly. Sometimes the best thing you can do is let go of what isn't working and make room for something better. It was a lesson I wished I'd learned years earlier, but I was grateful to have learned it at all. Sometimes being forgotten can be the wake-up call you need to remember your own worth. And as for that $950,000? Best investment I ever made, not in property, but in self-respect.